8 everyday foods that reduce brain inflammation. You walked into the kitchen for something, and now you're just standing there, nothing comes. For a second, a small, quiet worry creeps in. Is this just getting older or is it something more? Here's what almost nobody tells you. That moment may have very little to do with your age, and a great deal to do with what was on your plate yesterday. For years, doctors told patients that a forgetful mind was simply the price of growing older. That belief turned out to be incomplete. This video is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or replace advice from a qualified healthcare professional. If you have concerns about your memory, mood, or cognitive health, please speak with your doctor. Here's what makes this so interesting. The brain does not announce inflammation the way a swollen ankle does. There's no redness, no obvious swelling you can see in the mirror. Instead, it shows up as brain fog that won't lift, as a short temper that seems to come from nowhere, as standing in your own kitchen, reaching for a word that used to come easily. And because these signs are so easy to explain away, stress, poor sleep, getting older, most people never connect the dots back to what they're eating every single day. Today we're going to walk through 8 everyday foods that researchers have linked to lower markers of brain inflammation. Some of these will surprise you because they're already sitting in your kitchen right now. But stay with us until the end, because the 7th food on this list is one that most people actively avoid, believing it's bad for them, when the science actually tells a very different story. Later on, we'll also share a short story about a woman who made one small swap in her own kitchen and noticed a change she wasn't expecting. Let's start at the beginning with understanding why this matters so much in the first place. Neuroinflammation is simply the term for inflammation that occurs in brain tissue. In small, short bursts, this kind of inflammation is actually helpful. It's part of how the brain repairs itself after an injury or fights off infection. The trouble starts when that inflammatory response never fully switches off, when it lingers in the background for months or even years. Over time, chronic low-grade inflammation has been associated in scientific studies with difficulties in memory, slower processing speed, and in some cases, a higher long-term risk for cognitive decline. The encouraging part of this story is that diet appears to be one of the more accessible tools we have for helping to calm that inflammatory activity. Let's get into the foods themselves. Number 1, fatty fish rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Salmon, sardines, mackerel, and other cold-water fish contain high levels of omega-3 fatty acids, particularly 2 types known as EPA and DHA. These fats are not just building blocks for cell membranes throughout the body. They also appear to play a direct role in regulating the brain's inflammatory response. DHA in particular makes up a significant portion of the fatty tissue in the brain itself, which is part of why researchers have paid so much attention to it. Several studies have found that people who regularly consume fatty fish tend to show lower levels of inflammatory markers in blood tests, and some research has connected higher omega-3 intake with better performance on memory and reasoning tasks in older adults. It's worth noting that not all fish are equal here. Farmed versus wild-caught fish and the specific species can affect the exact fat content, so variety tends to be a reasonable approach. For those who don't eat fish, foods like walnuts and flaxseed, which we'll touch on later, offer a plant-based alternative, though the body converts those fats less efficiently. If you're currently on blood-thinning medication, it may be helpful to discuss fish oil or omega-3 supplementation with your healthcare provider before making major changes, since these fats can have a mild effect on blood clotting. Number 2, wild blueberries and other deeply colored berries. There's a reason blueberries keep showing up in nutrition headlines, and it isn't hype. Blueberries, along with blackberries, blackcurrants, and other deeply pigmented berries, are rich in compounds called anthocyanins. These are the pigments responsible for that deep blue and purple color, and they belong to a larger family of plant compounds known as flavonoids. What makes anthocyanins particularly interesting to researchers is their apparent ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, the protective filter that keeps most substances from freely entering brain tissue. Once there, these compounds appear to interact with the signaling pathways involved in inflammation and oxidative stress, essentially helping to calm down some of the chemical chaos that contributes to cellular aging in the brain. A number of studies involving older adults have observed improvements in certain memory tasks after several weeks of regular berry consumption, though researchers are careful to note that more long-term research is still needed. Frozen berries retain most of their beneficial compounds, so fresh is not a requirement here, which makes this one of the more affordable and accessible foods on this list. We should mention something before moving forward. Diet alone is rarely a single solution to a complex issue like brain health. Sleep, physical activity, stress management, and social connection all play meaningful roles too. But food is something we interact with multiple times a day, every single day, which is exactly why small, consistent choices here can add up to something significant over time. With that in mind, let's continue. Number 3, leafy green vegetables. Spinach, kale, collard greens, and Swiss chard often get labeled as foods you eat out of obligation rather than enjoyment. That reputation may not be entirely fair. Leafy greens are dense with vitamin K, lutein, folate, and beta-carotene, a combination that has been associated in observational research with a slower rate of age-related cognitive decline. One widely cited study following older adults over several years found that those who ate roughly 1 to 2 servings of leafy greens per day showed cognitive test scores that, on average, appeared years younger than those who rarely ate them. Researchers believe the antioxidant content in these vegetables may help protect brain cells from oxidative damage, a process closely tied to inflammation. Lutein specifically accumulates in brain tissue and has drawn particular interest for its potential protective role. For anyone who finds leafy greens unappealing on their own, blending them into a smoothie with fruit, or sautéing them with garlic and olive oil, which we'll discuss shortly, can make them considerably easier to enjoy on a regular basis. Number 4, extra virgin olive oil. This next one might already be a familiar name if you've heard of the Mediterranean diet, which has been studied extensively for its association with heart and brain health. Extra virgin olive oil contains a compound called olecanthal, which has drawn scientific interest because of the way it appears to interact with some of the same inflammatory pathways targeted by common anti-inflammatory medications, though it works far more gently and at much lower concentrations. Beyond olecanthal, olive oil is also rich in polyphenols, plant compounds with antioxidant properties and monounsaturated fats, which support healthy cell membranes throughout the body, including in the brain. Large population studies have repeatedly linked higher olive oil consumption with lower rates of cognitive decline, though it's difficult to isolate olive oil entirely from the broader dietary pattern it's usually part of. Choosing extra virgin varieties, rather than refined olive oil, matters here, since the refining process strips away many of the beneficial plant compounds. A simple habit like using olive oil as your primary cooking fat, or drizzling it over vegetables, is a low-effort way to incorporate it consistently. Let's talk about Carol for a moment. Carol is 71 years old and lives in a small town in Ohio. A few years ago, she started noticing that she'd walk into a room and forget why she went there several times a week. It worried her enough that she brought it up with her doctor, who reviewed her diet and daily habits with her. Nothing about her situation suggested anything urgent, but her doctor did suggest a few gradual changes, including swapping her usual cooking oil for extra virgin olive oil and adding more leafy greens to her meals. Carol says she can't prove which specific change made the difference, and she's quick to point out that everyone's situation is different. But several months later, she mentioned to her doctor that those frustrating moments of forgetting why she'd walked into a room had become noticeably less frequent. Her story isn't a guarantee, and it isn't a substitute for medical guidance. It's simply one example of how small, sustained dietary shifts can be part of a larger picture of supporting brain health. Number 5, walnuts. Walnuts hold a somewhat unusual distinction among nuts. Sliced in half, they bear a passing resemblance to the shape of a human brain, something ancient healers noticed long before modern science understood why walnuts might actually be good for cognitive health. As it turns out, that old folk association may have some real substance behind it. Walnuts are one of the richest plant-based sources of alpha-linolenic acid, a type of omega-3 fatty acid that the body can partially convert into the same DHA found in fatty fish, though the conversion process is not especially efficient. Beyond their fat content, walnuts also contain polyphenols and vitamin E, both of which have antioxidant properties that may help reduce oxidative stress in brain tissue. A study following participants over multiple years found that regular walnut consumption was associated with improved cognitive function scores compared to those who rarely ate them. Because walnuts are calorie-dense, a small handful, roughly 1 ounce, a few times a week appears to be a reasonable amount for most people, rather than eating them by the bagful. Number 6. Turmeric and its active compound curcumin. Turmeric is the bright yellow-orange spice most commonly associated with curry dishes, and its active compound, curcumin, has become one of the most studied plant compounds in relation to inflammation anywhere in the body, including the brain. Curcumin appears to interact with several of the molecular pathways involved in the inflammatory response, and some laboratory research has even suggested it may help support the clearance of certain protein buildups associated with cognitive decline, though this research is still developing and should not be interpreted as a proven treatment. One clinical trial involving older adults found that participants who took a curcumin supplement over an 18-month period showed improvements in certain memory tests compared to those who received a placebo. It's important to mention that curcumin on its own is poorly absorbed by the body. This is why turmeric is traditionally paired with black pepper, which contains a compound called piperine that significantly increases curcumin absorption, and with a source of fat, since curcumin is fat-soluble. Simply sprinkling turmeric into a dish without either of these may limit how much benefit the body actually receives from it. We're now halfway through this list, and if you've been following along, you may have already noticed a pattern. Nearly every food we've discussed so far shares a few common threads: healthy fats, antioxidant-rich plant compounds, and a track record of research spanning years, sometimes decades. That pattern continues, but the next food tends to catch people off guard because it's one that many well-meaning dieters have been taught to avoid. Number 7. Dark chocolate with a high cocoa percentage. For years, chocolate carried a reputation as an indulgence to feel guilty about rather than a food with genuine health benefits. Dark chocolate, particularly varieties containing 70% cocoa or higher, tells a more nuanced story. Cocoa is naturally rich in flavonols, a category of plant compounds that have been associated in research with improved blood flow to the brain and reduced markers of inflammation. A study published examining older adults found that those who consumed cocoa flavonols regularly over a period of weeks showed measurable improvements in certain memory tasks compared to a control group. Researchers believe part of this effect may come from flavonols supporting healthy blood vessel function, which in turn helps ensure the brain receives adequate oxygen and nutrients. The key detail here is the cocoa percentage and the ingredient list. Many popular chocolate products contain high amounts of added sugar and very little actual cocoa, which largely cancels out any potential benefit. Choosing dark chocolate with minimal added sugar in modest portions of perhaps 1 to 2 small squares a few times a week appears to be the approach most supported by current research, rather than treating it as an unlimited free pass. Number 8. Green tea. Our final food on this list has been part of daily life in many cultures for thousands of years, long before anyone understood the biochemistry behind it. Green tea contains a compound called EGCG, short for epigallocatechin gallate, one of the most extensively studied polyphenols in relation to brain health. EGCG has demonstrated antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties in numerous laboratory and observational studies, and some research has associated regular green tea consumption with a lower risk of age-related cognitive decline. Green tea also contains a naturally occurring amino acid called L-theanine, which appears to work alongside its modest caffeine content to support calm, sustained focus, rather than the jittery spikes sometimes associated with coffee. Population studies from regions where green tea consumption is high have observed associations with lower rates of certain neurodegenerative conditions, though as with many nutrition studies, it's difficult to separate the tea itself from other lifestyle factors common in those populations. For most healthy adults, 2 to 3 cups a day appears to be a reasonable amount, though anyone sensitive to caffeine or currently taking certain medications should check with their doctor first, since green tea can interact with a small number of prescriptions. So where does this leave us? 8 foods, each studied through a slightly different lens, yet all pointing toward the same underlying idea: what we eat does not stay contained to the stomach or the bloodstream. It reaches all the way into the tissue of the brain itself, influencing, in small and cumulative ways, how well that tissue is able to defend itself against the slow burn of chronic inflammation. None of these foods work like a switch that flips overnight. The research behind nearly all of them points toward consistency over months and years, not a single meal or a single supplement. Perhaps the most striking figure to remember from everything we've covered is this one. In the study on leafy greens we mentioned earlier, participants who ate about 1 to 2 servings a day showed cognitive test performance that researchers estimated was equivalent to being roughly 11 years younger than those who rarely ate them at all. 11 years from a habit as simple as a side salad or a handful of sauteed spinach a few times a week. If there's one thing we hope you take away from this video, it's that brain health is not something that happens to you. It's something you participate in, meal by meal, day by day, in ways that are far more within your control than most people realize. We'd love to know which of these 8 foods surprised you the most, and whether you're already eating any of them regularly. Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you found this video helpful, sharing it with someone you care about, a parent, a grandparent, a friend who's been feeling foggy lately might be one of the most useful things you do today. If you'd like to see more videos like this one, consider subscribing. We've got a lot more to explore together. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.